Welcome, fellow travelers of Middle-earth. Today, we embark on a journey into the shadows of the Second Age, a time where power, ambition, and fate collide. Together, we'll delve into the origins of one of Tolkien's most enigmatic and terrifying creations, the Witch-king of Angmar. His story is one of tragedy and transformation, deeply rooted in the lore of Númenórean and the machinations of Sauron. This video isn't just a retelling. It's a deep dive into his life before the Ring of Power claimed him. Drawing from Tolkien works like the Lordoftherings, the Silmarillion, and even unfinished tales, we'll explore his rise from a mortal lord to the dread ring wraith we fear and loathe. Each step of his journey reveals not just his fall, but also the cost of power and the darkness that comes when ambition outweighs humanity. Stay with me as we uncover a forgotten legacy, ancient magics, and the sinister influence of Sauron. I promise you a tale rich in lore and detail, one that connects us back to the very fabric of Tolkien's world. And of course, this is an interactive journey. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of the Witch King story fascinates you most? Is it his tragic past, his rise to power, or his ultimate corruption? Without further ado, let's step into the shadows and begin unraveling in the story of the Witch King. Now, let's start at the beginning, with the young lord who had no idea that his life would become a tale of terror and despair. In the early years of Middle-earth's Second Age, a young lord inherited a legacy steeped in honor, but veiled in sorrow. His family's castle, an imposing fortress south of Angmar, stood as a sentinel among jagged peaks. This was not merely a home. It was a symbol of resilience, a stronghold against the ever-looming chaos of the northern lands. Yet despite its grandeur, the castle held secrets as cold and shadowed as its stone walls. Orphaned at a tender age, the young lord faced a world of burdens before he could even understand the weight of them. His parents' deaths were shrouded in mystery, whispered about in hushed tones by the castle's inhabitants. Was it sickness? Treachery? The truth was lost, buried alongside their bodies, leaving their son not just alone, but thrust into responsibilities far beyond his years. While other children ran free in sunlit meadows, he navigated the cold corridors of leadership, his boyhood dreams sacrificed to duty. He was Númenórean by blood, descended from a proud lineage of warriors and kings. But where his ancestors' paths were paved with valor, his seemed littered with shadows. The echoes of his heritage haunted him. Stories of power and conquest filled the castle library. He often spent sleepless nights poring over tomes of history, imagining the lives of the heroes who came before him. Yet, with each page he turned, his isolation deepened, and the weight of expectations grew heavier. The Lord's fascination with his lineage soon turned into an obsession. He saw his ancestors as more than just forebears. They became ideals to emulate, destinies to reclaim. If they had carved their names into the annals of Middle-earth, why couldn't he? This hunger for greatness was not born of arrogance, but of longing, a desire to belong, to prove himself worthy of the legacy he had inherited. But greatness comes at a price. His relentless pursuit of knowledge began to alienate him from the people he was sworn to protect. To his subjects, he was distant and enigmatic, a figure they revered but could not truly understand. To himself, He was a boy trying to fill shoes far too large, struggling to reconcile the man he wanted to become with the child he still was. As the years passed, the young lord's solitude became his greatest companion. Alone in a castle, surrounded by echoes of the past, he began to forge a path that would lead him into the annals of history, not as a hero, but as a harbinger of dread. The young lord's early years were marked by a haunting silence. The loss of his parents left more than an empty seat at the dining table. It left a void in his life that nothing could fill. The halls of his ancestral home, once filled with laughter and light, now echoed only with whispers of his lineage and the weight of unspoken grief. Servants and advisors attended to his needs, but none could provide the comfort and guidance a boy craved. He was, for all intents and purposes, utterly alone. Despite his isolation, the Lord showed an uncanny resilience. Even as a child, he carried himself with a maturity beyond his years, born from necessity rather than choice. He took to studying the laws of his land, learning not just the duties of governance, but also the art of survival in a world that seemed poised to consume him. Yet behind the stoic facade, he remained a boy, mourning the loss of a mother's touch and a father's wisdom. The mystery surrounding his parents' deaths became an obsession. Whispers of betrayal and dark magic were woven into the fabric of castle gossip, but no definitive answers ever surfaced. This lack of closure gnawed at him, planting seeds of mistrust that would grow into thorns over time. He began to see the world not as a place of wonder, but as a battleground where loyalty was fleeting and danger lurked in every shadow. His childhood offered little reprieve. The responsibilities of lordship weighed heavily on him, and, though he shouldered them admirably, they robbed him of innocence. While other boys learned to ride horses or play games, he learned to read treaties, balance ledgers, and listen to the veiled warnings of advisors. Every decision he made, no matter how small, carried consequences that shaped the lives of his people. Yet there were moments of light in his otherwise somber existence. He found solace in the beauty of his castle surroundings, the rugged peaks, the quiet forests, and the starlit skies. These brief escapes into nature allowed him to feel, if only for a moment, the freedom that had been denied to him. But even in these moments, the shadow of his duties loomed, reminding him that he could never truly escape his fate. As he grew older, the young lord began to harden. The boy who once sought answers and companionship became a man focused on control and order. The unanswered questions about his parents' deaths became less of a curiosity and more of a lesson. Trust no one. Rely only on yourself. It was this mindset that would later open the door to the darkness that awaited him as he sought power, not just to protect his realm, but to shield himself from the vulnerabilities of his own humanity. Amid the weight of his responsibilities, the young lord discovered a refuge in the pursuit of knowledge. Within the vast library of his ancestral castle, he unearthed tomes and scrolls chronicling the history of Middle-earth, tales of the valorous Númenóreans and the rise and fall of empires. This was his sanctuary, a place where the pressures of governance gave way to a world of endless possibilities. For hours, sometimes days, he would lose himself in the words of those who came before, seeking wisdom and solace in the pages. His fascination with history was not merely academic. The Lord felt a deep connection to his Númenórean lineage, a bloodline that traced back to the mightiest of men blessed by the Valar. These ancestors had once been the epitome of strength and wisdom, bridging the mortal and divine. To him, their legacy was not just a story, it was a promise, a standard he was determined to uphold, even as the world around him seemed intent on pulling him away from that path. Yet this pursuit of knowledge was not without its darker edges. The tales of his forebears, while inspiring, often spoke of ambition and conquest, of power sought at any cost. He began to see these qualities not as flaws, but as necessary tools for greatness. In his eyes, the ends justified the means, and he yearned to carve his own name into the annals of history, no matter the price. It was this mindset that began to shape his decisions, pushing him further from the ideals of heroism and closer to the shadow of corruption. As his thirst for knowledge grew, so did his collection of writings. He sought out rare manuscripts, hired scribes to transcribe ancient legends, and even ventured into the study of arcane texts. It was in these forbidden works that he found hints of power beyond comprehension, power that could bend the will of men, shape the fabric of reality, and perhaps even cheat death itself. These discoveries fascinated and terrified him in equal measure, yet he could not turn away from them. Despite the richness of his library, the Lord's curiosity was insatiable. He sought knowledge wherever it could be found, whether from wandering scholars, old hermits, or whispered rumors of forgotten places. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he truly understood about the world and his place within it. This realization only deepened his determination to seek the truth, to uncover the secrets of existence that seemed just out of reach. But in his relentless pursuit of wisdom, the young lord began to isolate himself further. His people, already distant from their enigmatic ruler, saw his obsession with books and scrolls as a sign of neglect. To them, he was a lord who lived in the past, disconnected from the realities of their struggles. To him, they were a distraction from his true purpose, a purpose he believed would one day justify the sacrifices he was making, even if it meant losing himself in the process. The young lord's solitude became more than a circumstance, and it transformed into a defining characteristic. With no parents to guide him and no confidant to share his burdens, he learned to rely entirely on himself. This self-reliance was born out of necessity, but quickly grew into a hardened shell, shielding him from both the responsibilities of leadership and the vulnerability of human connection. Over time, he ceased seeking companionship, choosing instead the cold comfort of his own thoughts. His castle, once a symbol of family and legacy, became a fortress of isolation. The grand halls, adorned with banners of Númenórean glory, now seemed vast and hollow. Servants moved in silence, fearful of disturbing their young master, whose gaze carried a weight they could not comprehend. To the people of his lands, he was a distant and enigmatic figure, more a ghost than a man. His rule was fair, but devoid of warmth, marked by efficiency rather than empathy. In the absence of guidance, the Lord looked inward, teaching himself the harsh lessons of leadership. He learned that to rule was to endure pain, loss, and the constant scrutiny of those who would judge his every decision. This philosophy shaped him, tempering his mind and heart like steel in a forge. Yet this self-forged resilience came at a cost. Each day he withdrew further from the world, his humanity slowly eroded by the weight of his crown. As he grew older, his isolation bred a deep mistrust of others. To him, vulnerability was a weakness, one he could not afford to display. Even his closest advisors were kept at arm's length, their loyalty questioned at every turn. The young lord believed that to rely on anyone but himself was to invite betrayal, a lesson reinforced by the whispers of treachery that had surrounded his parents' deaths. This belief became a cornerstone of his rule, shaping his relationships and decisions. Yet despite his stoicism, the Lord was not immune to the toll of his isolation. At night, when the castle was silent and the weight of the day's burdens pressed upon him, he often found himself haunted by memories of his parents and the childhood he had lost. In these moments, he felt the ache of longing, a yearning for connection, for understanding, for a life that had been taken from him too soon. But these feelings were fleeting, quickly buried beneath the armor of his resolve. By the time he reached adulthood, the Lord was a figure of both respect and fear. His stoic demeanor and unyielding discipline commanded admiration, but his cold detachment left him isolated in a world he had worked so hard to control. This isolation, while a source of strength, also became the foundation for the choices that would lead him down a path of darkness as he sought power, not to rule, but to protect himself from the vulnerabilities he refused to face. As the young lord matured, his fascination with knowledge turned toward the arcane and forbidden. No longer content with the histories of Middle-earth or the feats of his Númenórean ancestors, he began to delve into darker, more dangerous subjects, those shrouded in mystery and whispered about in fear. These were the secrets of power, the kind that could bend reality to one's will, cheat death, and unravel the natural order of the world. It was during this time that he discovered the grim arts of necromancy and blood magic. Initially, these studies were born from curiosity, an innocent desire to understand the forces that governed life and death. But as he delved deeper, the allure of these forbidden practices consumed him. He began to see them not just as tools, but as a means to achieve greatness, a way to transcend his mortal limits and secure his legacy in the annals of eternity. The castle's cold stone walls became the backdrop for his experiments, each one more ambitious and more horrifying than the last. The young lord sought answers to questions no man had dared to ask, using whatever means necessary to find them. Prisoners, drifters, and those he deemed expendable were dragged into his chambers, their screams echoing through the corridors as he conducted his ghastly trials. To him, their suffering was a necessary price for the knowledge he craved. Over time, his obsession began to warp his perception of the world. Where he once saw duty and responsibility, he now saw limitations and obstacles. The needs of his people became secondary to his pursuit of power. He began to justify his actions with a chilling detachment, convincing himself that the ends, immortality, invincibility, dominion, would justify any means. His humanity, once a faint glimmer, was now almost entirely consumed by his ambition. But the cost of these dark arts was steep. The toll of tampering with life and death left its mark not just on his soul, but on his body. His once vigorous form grew gaunt and pale, his eyes sunken and shadowed. Whispers among his servants spoke of a curse, a darkness that clung to their lord like a shroud. To those who saw him, he seemed less a man and more a specter, a haunting reflection of what he had become. Yet even as his body-mind deteriorated, the young lord pressed on. His desperation grew with each passing day, his experiments becoming more reckless and his ambitions more grandiose. He believed himself to be on the brink of a great discovery, one that would change the course of Middle-earth forever. But in his arrogance, he failed to see the abyss opening beneath him, a darkness that would not only consume him, but bind him to a fate far worse than death. Deep within the fortress, hidden from the prying eyes of his subjects, the young lord constructed a place of unspeakable torment, a chamber of horrors that reflected the depths of his descent into darkness. This was not a space of mere cruelty. It was a workshop of pain, a laboratory where his twisted experiments blurred the lines between life and death. Here, the boundaries of morality ceased to exist, replaced by his insatiable thirst for forbidden knowledge. The prisoners who found themselves in this chamber were not warriors or criminals. They were the discarded, the forgotten, the weak. To the Lord, they were tools, sacrifices in his pursuit of what he called a higher purpose. Each scream, each broken body was a step closer to unlocking the secrets of immortality and ultimate power. In his mind, he was not a torturer, but a pioneer, someone willing to bear the burden of sacrifice for the sake of discovery. Among his experiments were attempts to cheat death itself. Some prisoners were brought to the brink of death and then revived, their bodies twisted and mutilated by the process. Others were stripped of their flesh and bones, their remains used in grisly rituals designed to harness the essence of life. These rituals defied all reason and morality, but to the Lord, they were simply steps on a path he believed was destined for him. Over time, the chamber took on a life of its own. The walls seemed to hum with the anguish of those who had perished there, their despair soaking into the very stones. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as if the darkness that had consumed the Lord was spilling into the world around him. Servants whispered of hauntings and cursed energies, refusing to enter the lower levels of the castle where the chamber lay. But the Lord paid no heed to their fears. His focus was unyielding, his ambition blinding. Yet for all his cruelty, there were moments when the Lord felt the weight of his actions. In the dead of night, when the chamber was silent and the echoes of screams faded into memory, he would find himself staring at the blood-stained walls, questioning the cost of his pursuit. These doubts, however fleeting, were quickly buried beneath his resolve. He convinced himself that such sacrifices were necessary, that the path to greatness was never without blood. The Chamber of Horrors became a reflection of the Lord himself, broken, corrupted, and irreversibly darkened by the choices he had made. What had started as an innocent thirst for knowledge had turned into a monstrous obsession. He was no longer just a lord of his people. He had become a harbinger of despair, a figure whose very name would one day strike fear into the hearts of all who heard it. As the years stretched by, the young lord began to wither under the weight of his unrelenting ambition. The vibrant, curious boy who had once sought knowledge for its own sake was gone, replaced by a hollow and desiccated shell of a man. Time seemed to stretch endlessly before him, each day marked not by progress, but by the erosion of his spirit. What once had been a noble pursuit now felt like eternal struggle against forces he could no longer comprehend. His descent into darkness had cost him everything: his health, his humanity, and even his hope. Though he continued his experiments and delved deeper into forbidden magics, the satisfaction he had once derived from these pursuits was gone. Now he pressed forward out of desperation, clinging to the faintest glimmers of possibility that he might achieve what he sought: immortality and ultimate power. The burdens of his past hung over him like a storm cloud. The memories of his parents, the weight of his lineage, and the shadow of his own failures combined to create an overwhelming sense of despair. In the rare moments of clarity, he would reflect on the path that had brought him here and wonder if there had ever been a point where he could have turned back. These thoughts were fleeting, quickly drowned out by his all-consuming need to press forward. Physically, the toll was evident. His once proud Númenórean frame, a testament to the strength of his ancestors, was now frail and wasted. His skin, pale and gaunt, clung to his bones, and his eyes, once filled with determination, now held only a hollow, haunted gaze. Those who saw him whispered of a curse, of a man who had sought too much and paid dearly for it. To his people, he was still their lord, but to himself, he was a shadow of the man he had once been. Emotionally, the isolation he had embraced for so long became his prison. The world outside his castle felt distant and unreal, a place he no longer belonged to. He had walled himself off so completely that even the faintest traces of joy or connection were beyond his grasp. His heart, once capable of yearning and longing, had turned to stone, unyielding and cold. He had become a man consumed by his own darkness. In this state of despair, the Lord began to realize the true cost of his ambition. The power he had sought so desperately now felt like an unreachable dream, and the sacrifices he had made weighed heavily on his soul. Yet even in the face of this realization, he could not stop. He was too far gone, bound to the path he had chosen, and unable to see any way out but forward. This was the beginning of his final descent, a journey that would end not in glory, but in eternal servitude to a power far greater than his own. In the darkest depths of his despair, when the weight of his failures seemed insurmountable, the young lord's path crossed with that of Sauron, the Dark Lord of Middle-earth. At this time, Sauron was still able to take on a fair and beguiling form, a figure of striking beauty with pale skin, glistening white hair, and an aura of almost divine power. He was mesmerizing, and to the weary lord, he appeared as both salvation and promise. Sauron approached with cunning, his voice a velvet whisper that cut through the young lord's defenses. He spoke not as a tyrant, but as a confidant, weaving tales of strength, eternal life, and dominion. His words were honeyed, designed to appeal to the Lord's deepest desires. "You have suffered greatly," Sauron said, his tone intimate and understanding. "But it is through suffering that greatness is forged. You need not endure this pain alone." The Lord, weakened in both body and spirit, found himself drawn to Sauron's promises. Here was someone who understood his struggle, someone who saw his potential, and offered him a way to transcend his mortal limitations. For a man who had spent his life seeking power and knowledge, the allure of Sauron's words was irresistible. It was not just the promise of strength that captivated him, but the hope of finally escaping the torment that had defined his existence. Sauron's ultimate temptation came in the form of a single glimmering ring, adorned with ancient runes and radiating an otherworldly allure. It seemed to pulse with the promise of untold power. "This ring," Sauron explained, "is a gift, a tool through which you can achieve all you have ever desired. With it, you will command respect, fear, and loyalty. No one will ever challenge your authority again. The young lord hesitated, his trembling fingers hovering above the ring. He knew, deep down, that this was not just a gift, but a chain, a bond that would tie him to Sauron's will. Yet the prospect of turning away was unthinkable. Without the ring, he was nothing, a broken man clinging to the remnants of his fading strength. With it, he could become invisible, immortal, a legend among men. As he slid the ring onto his finger, a surge of dark energy coursed through him, igniting a sensation of euphoria and supremacy. In that moment, the young lord felt invincible. His frailty melted away, replaced by an intoxicating sense of power. But what he did not realize was that this act marked the beginning of his enslavement. Sauron's influence seeped into his soul, binding him with invisible threads of domination. The Lord's transformation was immediate, but incomplete. Though he felt stronger, more alive, he was unaware of the full cost of his choice. The ring was not just a tool of power, it was a vessel of corruption, an extension of Sauron's will. By accepting it, the young lord had taken the first step toward becoming the Witch-king of Angmar, a servant of darkness, whose legacy would be one of terror and destruction. The moment the ring slid onto his finger, the young lord's fate was sealed. What began as a rush of power, a feeling of invincibility, quickly turned into something far darker. The ring's magic cleft through his veins like fire, filling him with a sense of supremacy. Yet it was laced with something insidious, a whisper of submission, a quiet voice reminding him that this power was not his own. In the days that followed, the changes became undeniable. His once frail and withered body regained strength, but it came with a price. His soul felt heavier, as if weighed down by chains he could not see. The Lord was no longer entirely himself. The ring, while granting him what he had long desired, also began to corrupt his thoughts, twisting his ambitions into something unrecognizable. Under Sauron's subtle guidance, the Lord embraced his newfound power. He wielded it with a ferocity that terrified those around him. Where once he had been a distant and enigmatic ruler, he now became a force of fear and domination. His subjects, though loyal, began to whisper of a darkness that clung to their lord, another worldly presence that set him apart from the world of men. Despite his growing strength, the Lord could not shake the feeling that he was no longer in control. The ring's influence was subtle at first, nudging him toward decisions that served not his will, but Sauron's. The young lord told himself that he was still the master of his fate, but deep down he knew he was bound to something far greater and far more malevolent than himself. The bond between the ring and its bearer grew stronger with each passing day. The Lord's connection to Sauron became almost tangible, a thread of power that tied him directly to the Dark Lord's will. He could feel Sauron's presence not as a distant force, but as an intimate and omnipresent shadow guiding his every step. The Lord began to lose his sense of self, his thoughts and desires blending with those of his master. By the time the full extent of his servitude became clear, it was too late to turn back. The young lord who had once sought to carve his own destiny was now shackled to the will of Sauron. He had become a tool, a weapon to be wielded in the Dark Lord's quest for domination over Middle-earth. Though his power had grown immeasurably, it was no longer his own. He was no longer a man, but a servant of darkness. and his journey to becoming the Witch-king of Angmar was nearly complete. Thus, the tale of the young lord reaches its inevitable turning point. A man of Númenórean heritage, burdened by a tragic past, consumed by ambition, and ultimately bound to the will of Sauron. His transformation from an orphaned ruler to the Witch-king of Angmar is one of the darkest chapters in the history of Middle-earth. It is a story that warns of the perils of unchecked desire and the price of power when it comes at the cost of one's soul. But his tale doesn't end here. As the Witch-king, he becomes the leader of the Nazgûl, Sauron's most loyal and feared servants. His influence spreads terror across Middle-earth, from the wars of Angar to the siege of Minas Tirith. He is no longer the young lord who sought greatness, but a shadow of malice bound eternally to his master's will. If you enjoyed this exploration of the Witch-king's origins, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into Tolkien's world. From the glory of Númenor to the rise of Sauron, there's always more to uncover in the vast lore of Middle-earth. Together, let's continue to honor the legacy of J.R.R. Tolkien and keep his stories alive for generations to come. Until next time, may the stars of Arendelle guide your way, and may the wisdom of Gandalf inspire your path. Farewell, my friends, and remember, even the smallest person can change the course of the future.